we want to continue. Just a little, again, for those of y'all, short introduction. My name is Jimmy Yen. I'm a licensed acupuncturist here in Austin, Texas. And Justin, I wanted to bring Justin, who is an expert at a topic.
Yeah, guys, my name's Justin.
And Justin, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
In the human performance space for about 15 years and got my master's degree at the University of Louisville, did my postgraduate doctoral work in heart rate variability. And that's really what we're diving into today. And I can't wait to be able to share this with you. We've got a beautiful location here in lovely Costa Rica. So it's been amazing. We're hosting 20 entrepreneurial couples down here in Costa Rica for our biannual retreat that we do with really focused on health and relationships. So couldn't be more excited to spend this time here with you.
Yeah, I heard about that trip for couples. That looks nice. So today's topic, we're going to talk about heart rate variability. Short is HRV. In the chat, just let us know if anybody has heard of HRV, heart rate variability. So I pretty much know very minimal about it. And so I'm going to be taking notes. So like I said last time, all of y'all should be having a notebook when we're doing these 30-minute talks, and so that you can take notes and learn, because this is information that we want to dispense to you to empower you to take control of your own health, because no one's going to care more about your own health than you. And your body is one of the best doctors. So our focus is to help you identify what your doctor inside is telling you about what you should do. So Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about HRV?
Because it just empowers people so much. At the end of the day, we have to take ownership back of our health. And when we have now a metric to help us understand where we are today, that's the way that we're able to truly know how our body's adapting to stress and strain. So before I dive into HRV, the biggest thing that we want to get under really kind of a full understanding of is that our body has 4 key constructs in which we have the human experience: our mind, our heart, our body, and lastly, our spirit. And those 4 components are ultimately integrated by our soul. You see, we're just a bunch of souls having a human experience. And that human experience is maybe 80 years, 100 years, 120 years, however long you get the privilege to grace this earth. And our health span is what we should actually be concerned about, not our lifespan. You see, aging is not preventable. Everybody's going to age. But what is preventable is how well we age. And health span is ultimately the measure of that. And so knowing that our heart, which is ultimately related to our desires, our mind, which is ultimately related to our thoughts and beliefs, our body, which is ultimately related to our habits and behaviors, and our spirit, which is related to our relationships and environment, ultimately is where we have this human experience. Now, here's where everything kind of comes in together. We cannot differentiate. Our bodies cannot differentiate. Our human experience cannot differentiate mental, physical, spiritual, or emotional stress. Our emotional stressors are tied to our heart and our desires. Our mental stressors are tied to our thoughts and our beliefs in our mind. Our physical stressors are tied to our habits, behaviors, and lifestyle in our body. And ultimately, our spiritual stressors are tied to our spirit in our relationships and our emotions, or in our environment, pardon me. The fact that our body cannot iterate, cannot differentiate between these forms of stressors, the response is the exact same. Increase epinephrine, increase cortisol, increase adrenaline, increase heart rate, increase respiration rate, increase all of these factors in our body that go into literally just to support us, just to have us here and protect us, to keep us alive. That is what our bodies have been built for. But what happens is the world that we live in, because we don't give ourselves downtime, We don't give ourselves this break. We don't allow ourselves just to relax. We don't allow ourselves an afternoon in the spa. We ultimately end up in this state of chronic stress. Remember, stress is not the stress we think about, pulling our hair out. Stress is listening to this information and being able to process it. Stress is that conflict that you have that's unresolved between your spouse and yourself. It could be a multitude of different, it could be trying to figure out what it is that you really want to do from a career standpoint. All of these stressors, your body reacts the exact same way. Chronic stress, ultimately, let's come back to this. Chronic stress leads to chronic symptoms. And chronic symptoms, brain fog, fatigue, nausea, gut issues, energy loss, bloating, weight gain, headaches, have been normalized by our society. And these chronic symptoms are what lead to chronic illness. And chronic illness is what's killing 71% of Americans. It is the leading cause of death, and it's ultimately preventable. Now, why do I go through that whole process? Why do I go through that whole thing? Why do I love this so much? Because if we look at it at the end of the day, HRV is the measure of how our body is adapting to stress and strain on the body. So we now, for the first time, have a metric, a measurement that allows us to see what state our body is actually functioning in, what state our body is actually operating in, what habits are working for us or what habits are working against us, and brings us awareness as to how our body is adapting to those stressors and strains, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And that is why I ultimately just love this metric and love what HRV does and the empowering tool that it can be for people to take control of their health again.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you were saying these, that our bodies were built to be running 100% all the time. And recently, I think just today, I saw a quote by Jim Quick. Yep. I think that's his name, right? The mind guy, the brain guy, the mind guy, yeah. And he had a post that says, the brain was not built to be functioning at 100% of the time. And that means we need to have that de-stress. We need to have that cool down. We need to, it's just like our brains, our bodies are not functioned to just pump out in the sense of, production. It also needs to, because with every production, there's waste that's generated, which means it needs to be eliminated. And that's why we need to sleep, because sleep is the time when we actually have what I call our street sweepers that sweep through our brains, activate the lymphatic systems, and it cleans everything. But yeah, that was not to get off topic. But yes, so HRV is, I was reading up on it today because I was ready to make sure I understand what you were going to say. And actually, you said it very beautifully, and I think it's very understandable, easy to understand. So probably some people are now wondering how, since we have this new technology, maybe I saw in the chat, some people have heard about it, and there's all these devices.
So
let's talk about how do we measure
the best part
HRV?
about it is that there's every single wearable device now is grabbing heart rate variability. The nice thing about it is that and I'll put a little link here in the comments, join.whoop.com/own it. You guys can grab a free Whoop band. Literally just click on that link and you can grab a free Whoop band that's going to give you access to all of this great information, this great data. However, the big thing that we want to come back to is that any wearable device, Apple, Fitbit, Polar, Garmin, Aura, Whoop, they're all measuring heart rate variability. That is the biggest thing, that they're all grabbing this metric because it is so powerful and it has the ability to let us know where we are at any given point of time. It gives us this understanding and this possibility to truly take over our health again and to empower us in this space. And so when you look at this, when you kind of shift thought process, when you shift what it is that you're looking at, why you're looking at it, and change your perspective on how your body's functioning, it really has a big impact on how you're able to show up. Now, let me kind of dive into what heart rate variability actually is in terms of what we're measuring. So when you think about heart rate variability, if I was to sit here and say, hey, Jimmy, your heart is beating at 60 beats per minute, what would we think? Well, our heart is beating at 1 beat per second, because 60 beats divided by 60 seconds equals 1 beat per second. But that's not actually how our bodies function. Our heart beats simply when it has to. So having that heart rate of 60 beats per minute, your heart is actually beating intermittently at 797 milliseconds, 842 milliseconds, 920 milliseconds. And after the course of those 60 seconds, your heart will have beaten 60 beats. And so what we're actually looking at when we're measuring heart rate variability is we're measuring the time interval and the variation of time interval between each successive beat. Now, the greater the variability, the more ready you are to take on stress, the more parasympathetic you are, the more rested, the more digested, the better adapted your body is to the stress that you've been placing on it. The lower, and I'll say that again, the lower the number in HRV, the more stressed your body is, the less ready it is to take on more stress and strain. Really important to understand that. The higher the variability, the better. The lower means that we're ultimately needing a little bit more adjustment in our habits or our daily routines and behaviors to help us adapt in a better way. And we're going to get into that in the 8 controllables. And what are the biggest things that impact HRV? What are the behavior changes? What are the lifestyle components that you're going to want to be able to make some changes on, from sleep to environment to nutrition to exercise to self-care to mindset? All of these things have a big impact. But what we need to understand first is, what is HRV saying? What is it ultimately dictating to us? And why is it an important metric to be ultimately concerned about and aware of, to give us a better understanding of where we're at currently?
Yeah, and so let's dive in deep into that, because I think we have another session where we'll talk more about continue the conversation of HRV. So let's make sure that everybody understands, what's HRV. It is not your heart rate. It is not when you check your pulse. Your pulse is beating 60 per minute or 100 beats per minute. That's not what HRV is about. It involves it, but it's not the same thing as heart rate variability. So the other thing is because heart rate variability fluctuates with the autonomic nervous system. You already kind of mentioned about some of it, the parasympathetic, the sympathetic. Can you describe in layman's terms so that people can understand how the heart rate 100%. Variability reflects the autonomic nervous system?
Is built into two different sides. It's got the sympathetic and it's got the parasympathetic. Your parasympathetic nervous system, think rest, digest, relax, calm, cool, collected. It's like how I feel right now. And the cool part about this is you can train your body to be more parasympathetic. Think about, and a lot of you guys are probably out there can relate to this. Let's say you're walking down the street and you drop your phone. Immediately you have probably a stress response. You probably get angry, you probably yell, you probably swear, you might get really anxious, like, oh my gosh, did my phone screen break? Your body has just gone from resting and digesting, relaxing, immediately into a sympathetic state, immediately into a stress state. We can train ourselves to relax a little bit more and be like, oh, you know what? It's okay. However it's going to come up is, and however it's going to turn out is there. And that, along, to be honest with you, this is why a lot of this work and a lot of what we do comes into that spiritual and emotional stress, is because a lot of it is just surrendering to what's supposed to happen and being present in your body in the way it's supposed to be. So parasympathetic states allow us to be in this rest digest state. Now, however, this is also critical. It's not always awesome to be in a parasympathetic state. If you're going to play a sport, if you're going to give a presentation, if you're going to do something that requires a lot of work, you're going to want to be in a sympathetic state, which is a stress, fight, flight, high impact energy state. And that's a big, big important piece. Big piece of this. And so when we can come at this and we can understand that there needs to be a rhythm back and forth between sympathetic, stress, fight, and flight, and parasympathetic, rest and digest, that's when we ultimately start to live in a state of what we call ownership. Living in a state of chronic sympathetic overload is ultimately what will burn us out, is ultimately where we see chronic illness come from. We talked about it earlier, that little perpetual downward side. Our body doesn't know the difference, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional stress. The response of the body in a stress state is to be in a sympathetic state, which is to increase inflammation in the body. Inflammation chronically ultimately creates chronic symptoms. Chronic symptoms creates chronic illness. Chronic illness is what's that leading cause. And ultimately HRV is that indicator of where are we in that balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activation.
Yeah, and also to clarify, the heart rate variability when it's low, it doesn't actually, because I was reading this and just want to make sure everybody that being in a constant sympathetic state is not good, right? But on the on the extreme, on the other hand, if you're in a constant parasympathetic state, that also is an indicator that there's something maybe wrong also, that the body's trying to constantly heal something. So the HRV is not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, HRV is not to show that you're either in sympathetic or parasympathetic. It's more about the ability
100%.
for the
You
body
want to have
to fluctuate in
call,
between the two. Is that
heart rate
correct?
variability, flexibility. Meaning you want to see the highs and lows. You want to see the peaks and valleys. It's meaning that your body has a real great rhythm and it's not overloaded on any one side. Now, if you start tracking, and here's the biggest thing, if you really start using this, is any day to day metric, it's going to go high and it's going to go low. Now, what you want to look at is you want to look at trends. Are you trending upwards or are you trending downwards? And if you're trending downwards, you utilize this metric as an ability to start storytelling for yourself. And if you can start storytelling off of heart rate variability, oh, you know what? Yesterday, I was on back-to-back Zoom calls. I got in a nasty fight with my spouse, and I was running my kids from soccer to piano, didn't sleep very well, ate late at night, and I woke up and my HRV was low. Well, let's take a look at our habits and behaviors and what we went through that ultimately caused that versus the next day when we only have a couple phone calls. We get to work on some of our passion projects. We come home. It's an off night. None of the kids are playing sports. We sit at home. We watch a football game. And we have a great conversation with our spouse. And HRV jacks right up the next morning. Look at the difference. Because again, and realize that I do this on purpose when I give examples. I didn't talk about working out. I didn't talk about running. I didn't talk about anything fitness. I talked about spiritual, emotional, and mental stressors. Because when you look at the impact of mental, physical, spiritual, emotional stress, our body can't tell the difference, and thus the response of HRV is always the same. And so that's the really important thing in understanding when you're looking at this, is be able to storytell off of your previous day to help empower you on what moves the needle for you, what helps you get either more sympathetic, more ready to go, fight and flight response, versus what makes you more parasympathetic, rest, digest, relax, based upon what's actually happening and what's actually going on in your life, in and around you. It is an amazingly powerful tool, an amazingly powerful metric. And when we start to really put purposeful, intentional action steps, behaviors, and habits behind that, you really start to realize that, wow, I hold a lot of power inside of myself. I can create a lot of healing simply by being able to understand how to balance my nervous system much easier. And the thing about HRV, and I want to touch on this as well, is you can't compare your HRV to somebody else's, because yours is literally, it's you versus you. It's taking a look at what's happening in Jimmy's life, and there's no good or bad HRV. All we're looking at is positive and negative trends. Now, there are HRVs that are lower. Like if you're the age of 35 to 55, your HRV should be 45 plus. If your average HRV is lower than 45, we probably want to look at the stressors and our lifestyle and our habits and our behaviors that we're exposed to. We're probably not the fittest person. We probably don't sleep very, very well. We probably don't eat very well. We probably don't have a very good night routine or a morning routine. We probably don't have a lot of really deep, intimate relationships that we've focused on. We probably don't hydrate very well. We probably don't exercise on a regular basis. These are the things that we want to start to understand about ourselves and start to say, hey, you know what? This should be my wake-up call. This is actually my body communicating to me that something is not right, that something is actually internally, even on the outside, I might look quote unquote healthy. Internally, my body is saying something's not right. And so we have to heal ourselves from the inside out.
Awesome. Yeah, you've definitely got me hooked on it. I mean, I've looked at HRV in the past years, but it never really got my attention until I met you. So thank you for that. So just want to summarize what you were talking about, because I also read this, that when you're tracking HRV, originally HRV was used by professional athletes or just athletes in general like you, right? And they were using it to try to get that quick, recovery, or when to quick to train and so forth. And so maybe they were doing more of a 24-hour or short-term HRV. But what Justin was saying is, for us, for the normal person that's not the professional athlete.
That's a really great question. So number one is the gold standard, obviously, is a polar H10 heart rate monitor, or your actual EKG where you're hooking things up. Now, it's not realistic to sleep with a heart rate monitor on, although at the age of 13, I started sleeping with a heart rate monitor on and started pulling HRV from a raw score. Second is, it's not everybody has access to an EKG, nor would I ever expect anybody to want to do that. Now, when you come and take a look at this, the technology has evolved so rapidly and so powerfully. Whoop and Aura are leading the way when it comes to pulling HRV. Like, hands down, they are leading the field. And they're doing an unbelievable job. It's called PPG, which is polysonography, which is actually being able to take a look at like an LED light that comes through. And a lot of people will talk about the EMFs. Like, is there EMF radiation that I'm being exposed to? The EMF radiation from Whoop and Aura is actually 150 times less than what you're exposed to just by watching this on your phone. So yes, there is a small amount of EMFs, but nothing that you should actually be concerned about, because just walking down the street, you're exposed to about 100 times more. So the value of the information that you're getting versus the EMFs you're actually being exposed to is negligible. Second is, I love the ability to pull HRV passively, which is what Whoop, Aura, Fitbit, Garmin, some of these other things have been able to allow us to do, because there's nothing worse than waking up in the morning, having to put your finger on something, having to do anything, you go to a monitor and actually get it done, because again, you forget about it, you wake up at different times, and all of these things. So we have to make sure it's repeatable, we have to make sure it's reliable, and we have to make sure that we're able to do it no matter where we are around the same time, so we can get really high quality data.
Yeah. That's awesome. So Aura, for those of y'all who don't know, this is what an Aura ring is. I actually have it. I just don't wear it consistently because it's uncomfortable to sleep in. But I will do a better job on wearing it every day so I can get my HRV data. But yeah, so great information, Justin. And I
Yes.
believe it's the next
Yes. So
session,
next,
right?
the
Do
next
we
session, we're
continue with the
continuing with
HRV talk?
HRV.
The
We're
next
going in a
session?
little bit
Awesome.
deeper on how we can use it. We talk a little bit more about the 8 controllables, introducing you guys to the 8 controllables, how you can make these actionable and personable to you, how you can completely overhaul some of the habits and behaviors that you're doing, but then also utilize yourself as this a little bit of like an experiment to be able to now look at and empower yourself to understand what you're doing and the impact that it's having on your body.
Great.
I
Thank you,
love it, guys.
Justin, for sharing
See
your
you.
knowledge. And we'll see everybody next week.